All rise, please.
Mr. Barr, I understand that copies of the restriction order which has been made are now on the desks in the public gallery as well as on the notice outside. You are about, I think, to ask about a topic that you did cover during that restriction period. May I make it clear that anything that is now said about it, subject of course to any further mishaps, can be reported to the outside world with the usual 10-minute delay.
Mr. Craft, if you had known that Richard Clarke had risen to high office in the Troops Out movement, including becoming the convener to the National Secretariat, would you have approved?
No.
Moving to HN 354, Vince Harvey, he became treasurer of both the branch and the district of the SWP that he infiltrated. He described that in his witness statement as a fantastic opportunity. And he was referring to the intelligence that those positions gave him access to. Do you agree?
Yes, clearly it gave him access to all the membership.
Can I move now to the question of the prosecution of the officer that we know as HN 13?
I may just refresh my memory. I think I know who you're talking about. Yes, certainly.
We know, was prosecuted twice. Our understanding is that you were involved in dealing with part of the first of those two prosecutions.
Yes.
Can I start by drawing your attention to a couple of minutes? They are in the document at tabs 30, sir. That is MPS-0526. I may have got MPS-0526-784. And if we could have, once we've got that, page 12 up. This is right at the back of this minute sheet, so it's the beginning of the story in time. 19th of September 1977. This is very much the tail end of your service as head of the SDS. It reads, as you are aware, the Communist Party of England, Marxist-Leninist, under the guise of the East London People's Front, held an anti-fascist march on Saturday morning, the 17th of September, from Ilford to Barking. Outside Barking Police Station, a confrontation between one of the marchers and a suspected National Front photographer precipitated a general melee, resulting in a number of arrests. Detective Constable HN 13 SDS, who had been marching with his comrades, was knocked to the ground whilst trying to shield two young children and was somewhat battered by police prior to his arrest for insulting behaviour under the Public Order Act. He was released on bail later in the day and is due to appear at Barking Magistrates Court at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 21st of September. 3. The case is slightly complicated by the fact that DC 13 believes the constable who arrested him served with him some years ago, and although the latter did not recognise him at the time, there is a possibility that he might do so just before or in the course of the court hearing. I think it would be wise, subject to your agreement, if I were to see the arresting officer in the presence of his chief superintendent with a view to putting him partially in the picture. I would propose doing this along the lines that DC HN 13 operation was a one-off job. Now, if we can then go to page 11, That's the next in time. We move from the 19th to the 21st of September, and that reads, DC 13, together with his CPEML comrades, appeared at Barking Magistrates Court this morning and was remanded on bail to appear at the same court on the 3rd of January 1978, when the cases will be heard. I had a long conversation at the court with the arresting officer, PC, and we've redacted the officer's name, and it is clear that his colleague, PC, again, we've redacted the name, has said nothing to suggest that he might have recognised HN13. And you have signed both of those documents. Can I take it from this second later document, only 2 days later, that you did not, in fact, get the opportunity to talk with the constable in the company of his chief superintendent?
That is correct.
And that the conversation you had at Barking Magistrates was your first conversation with the arresting officer?
I believe so.
And it seems that the concern at the time was whether HN13 would be recognised by his uniformed colleague.
Yes.
And that that fear was allayed as a result of your conversation.
That is correct.
Can you recall whether or not you put him partially in the picture, as you phrased it, in eliciting that information?
I can't recall exactly what was said on that occasion. No, I'm sorry. Too long ago.
Can you recall whether or not the arresting officers would have known that HN13 was a police officer?
No, I can't recall that.
Presumably it follows from that answer. Still less can you help us with whether they knew he was an undercover police officer?
Yes, I don't remember anything to do with that. I do remember, as it's in my statement, that of course I was later involved.
Did you speak to the solicitor in the case?
No.
Did you speak to counsel in the case?
No.
Did you speak to the magistrate's clerk?
And the magistrate.
You spoke to them?
Yes.
And what did you tell them?
I briefed the magistrate that this was an undercover officer working under his undercover name, that it was a secret operation, that he would maintain that name. My concern also was that because he was arrested with these other people who like to make public displays, the chances were that they might try and kick up in the dock and behave badly, that he would be obliged to maintain his cover to join in.
Was that conversation on the same occasion that you spoke to the constable?
Don't think so. I think this was when the morning he appeared. I seem to remember it was on the morning he appeared.
Righto. Well, let's pull the next page up. So can we have back up MPS-0526 7874. It's tab 30, sir. And can we go to page 10? Now, this is the next in time, 6th of January 1978. Paragraph 5 of that says, contact has been established with a court official who is aware that one of the defendants, name not given, is an informant whom we would be anxious to safeguard from any prison sentence should this situation arise. So is it this appearance on their appearances, this document relates to appearances on the 3rd and 5th of January. Is it this occasion you're referring to or another one?
I remember going, I thought it was on the morning of the hearing, and I remember briefing the magistrate and the clerk to the court. Really, I can't, apart from what I've already said, I can't be absolutely sure about on which occasion.
Well, we can go to page 9. And this is the next in the sequence, 17th of April. This deals with the trial. And it says at paragraph 3, throughout this trial, contact was maintained with a court official whose invaluable assistance and cooperation was given without question. And our appreciation for this was expressed at the end of the proceedings. Now, the last two documents I've shown you, those dating from 1978, are signed by Superintendent Pride.
Yes.
And as we understand it, post-date your time as head of the SDS.
Yes, it's interesting. As I say, my memory is fixed on going to the court and seeing the magistrate, and the clerk of the court was with her. I can't really go beyond that to be absolutely accurate. I'm sorry, but that's where my memory goes.
If we stick with, first of all, the first two documents I showed you, which date from your tenure as head of the SDS, neither of them refer to speaking to the court. They only refer to the concern about HN 13 being recognised. Presumably, if on either of those occasions you had spoken to the court, you would have recorded that.
Yes, I would have thought so.
And in the January occasion, you would no longer have been in the SDS. So can you recall whether you attended court after you left the SDS?
No, I can't remember.
And the minute doesn't specifically say it was you, and helpfully it doesn't say who it was, but it only goes so far as to say that the court was told that one of the defendants was an informant. It doesn't go so far as to say the court was informed that a specific person was an undercover police officer.
Yes, I understand the question, but I did actually brief the magistrate on the fact that he was an undercover police officer.
How good is your recollection? Could you be, for example, confusing this with HN 12, who was prosecuted for fly posting when you were a chief superintendent? If you could hold the file to one side,
Sorry.
please.
I don't seem to have HN 12, as it's further along. I don't seem to be in sequence.
HN 12 is a Tranche 2 officer. I don't know whether your key goes that far.
The fact remains that I was not... The only occasion on which I went to brief a magistrate was this one occasion at Barking. I don't remember anything else.
And are you sure it was Barking?
Absolutely, yes.
Can I move now to the topic of the welfare of the officer and his family, and in particular the officers' wives, and in the case of Vince Harvey, partner. Did you, when you recruited new officers, visit their wives?
No.
Can you recall whether that was invariably the case?
No, I don't recall that being done when new people were being recruited. My involvement with wives came with one separate case, was the annual dinner we had with husbands and wives in a hotel in West London, where all the wives came and our own wives came, and it was a social occasion. That was the only occasion, apart from once, when I had any involvement with the wives.
We've had some evidence that officers were visited by managers from the SDS at the recruitment stage to explain the role, the long hours, and the weekend duties. Is that something that you did not do?
I didn't do that.
You've emphasised in your witness statement the importance of stability and home life. Was anything done to monitor the stability of an officer's home life once he had commenced his deployment?
No.
Was anything done to monitor the well-being of the officers' wives during deployments?
No.
Were any other concrete steps taken to take care of the wives?
No.
Would you accept that this role asked a lot of the officer's wife or partner?
Yes, I would.
With hindsight, do you think that the care and attention that was paid to them could have been better?
Yes, I do.
Would I be right in thinking that during your tenure, the length of a deployment was typically, absent exceptional circumstances, about 4 years?
Yes, although I think it was too long.
Was there any concern that the longer the deployment, the greater the risk to the well-being of the officer?
At the time, possibly not, although I can't be absolutely sure what I was thinking at the time. Probably it's more something I've thought of since.
Was there any concern at the time that the longer the deployment, the greater the risk to his family life?
No, I can't say there was.
And was there any consideration that the longer the deployment, the greater the risk of transgressions by the officer?
No.
What was the rationale for a deployment of approximately 4 years?
That it took a while to get involved, and they were productive for a while, but the feeling was that if they were there for too long, they would be detached from the normal work of the branch and therefore missing out on their career.
And at what was there any operational concern about how long it took to infiltrate a group and so forth?
I don't think it was an operational concern. It did take time.
You mentioned a moment ago that you did have a concern about the length of deployments. When did that concern occur to you?
I can't say specifically at the time. Obviously, it's something we must have discussed between us. It's more in recent times I thought back and realised that possibly 4 years was too long.
I'd like now to ask you a series of questions based upon annual reports for the SDS during the time in which you were serving in that unit. And I'd like to start with the 1974 report, which is at tab 1 of the bundle, sir. It's MPS-0730906. Now, you said in your witness statement that you remember drafting a lot of this report. Presumably this was the first one you had a hand in. It starts with the covering letter. But did you have a significant role in the drafting of the report itself?
This one is dated, the covering letter, 22nd of March 74.
It's just the file. If we can go through till we get the beginning of the report, please.
That opening letter is, I think, misplaced.
It is. Thank you. This is the 1974 report.
Yes.
Is it right that you played quite an influential role in this report?
If this is the one which would have been produced towards the end of 74, then certainly I would have had some input in the drafting, because Derek Neal and I would have written most of it between us.
It was written on the 4th of it's signed on the 4th of February 1975 by Derek Neal, and it
yes, well then we would both have been involved in drafting.
Okay. If we can go to page 13 on the electronic file, please, and to paragraph 20. that reads, the most traumatic event of the year was the anti-fascist demonstration on the 15th of June 1974, which culminated in the death of Kevin Gately. Having lacked a sufficiently interesting, broad-fronted target for some time, the ultra-left eventually decided to combat the re-emerging spectre of fascism as exemplified by the National Front. The June demonstration provided the opportunity, and urged on by the International Marxist Group and the Communist Party of England Marxist-Leninist, a violent confrontation between demonstrators and police occurred, with many of those present armed with large pieces of timber in the shape of flagpoles and banners charging the police lines in an effort to stop the National Front holding their meeting in Conway Hall. Fortunately, the SDS gave forewarning of both the size of the demonstration and the possible disorder which might occur. Gately's death introduced a note of harsh reality, so that subsequent demonstrators, both in the Metropolitan Police District and at Leicester, did not achieve the aims of the militant minority. Now, were you in the SDS when the demonstration took place?
Yes.
Did you write this part of the report?
I can't remember.
Without referring to any specific individuals, how do you know that the SDS gave forewarning of both the size of the demonstration and the possible disorder?
Oh, clearly, it would have been people who were involved in those organisations. I don't know which ones. I can't, at this stage, say which organisation or which of our officers and in which organisation produced. I think probably several of them. I don't really have the answer to that.
Are you able to say whether or not SDS intelligence made a difference to the police response?
I would think it did, yes.
You're thinking it did, but presumably a counter-demonstration on this scale will have been advertised.
Certainly, but the detail of exactly how this might happen was important in the sense that police could be in the right place at the right time in sufficient numbers. I think that's what it amounts to.
And is it right to say that it's difficult for you, in your role, to know precisely what contribution SDS intelligence made, as opposed to, say, information openly available?
No, I think the only person who could answer that one probably would be somebody running C Squad at the time who wrote the threat assessment, but I don't know.
Now, we can take that down. Moving on to clashes between the far left and the far right generally. Was it something that occurred often in that era?
Yes.
And was it your impression that it was the far left initiating the trouble, the far right initiating the trouble, or a bit of both?
I would have to say a bit of both.
And when the far left sought to disrupt the meetings of the far right, were the far right acting lawfully in conducting these meetings?
Yes, probably.
And vice versa?
I'm sorry, vice versa in what
When
sense?
the far right interrupt the far left's meetings and try to prevent them from taking place, the far
yes,
left are acting
but
lawfully.
I have to say that I suspect that on each side there was the opportunity to have a go at the other. So I'm not sure at what point the legal one moved into the illegal one.
I see. Can I move now to the Workers' Revolutionary Party, and can we go back to the 1974 report? So that's 0730 906. And if we could have page 15, please, paragraph 28. You write, or you have a hand in a report which includes the paragraph, "The Workers' Revolutionary Party, heartened by its recruiting campaigns during both recent general elections and by its growing financial support, will clearly be in the van of industrial unrest, but recent internal schisms within the Central Committee may well curtail its ambitions. Being a highly disciplined organisation expecting immediate obedience from its members, it has not so far caused any undue problems in the field of public order." It's fair to say, isn't it, that the WRP was not a public order problem?
That is correct.
And is it also right to say that although it had the aim of overthrowing parliamentary democracy, it was going about furthering those aims in lawful ways?
Largely, although I think they were always interested in infiltrating trade unions and therefore using the power of trade unions. So how far is that legal? I don't know. There's a doubt in my mind always about the extent to which a revolutionary group could influence a legal group like trade unions, operating perfectly legitimately, using their power, infiltrating the Labour Party as they did. How far is that illegal? I don't know. I think this is something which is beyond me, really.
So the focus from the report appears to be the WRP's role in industry. Can you recall what it was that they were doing in industry that was of concern to the SDS?
Not now. That report, or the detail that we were producing on the WRP was really for the security service, not for the police.
Now, in your witness statement, we can turn the paragraph up if you want to see it again, you've stated that the WRP was of interest to both Special Branch and the security service.
Yes, that was possibly me thinking, right, with a C Squad hat on, thinking they were going to be asked questions about the WRP by the security service, and so we were helping the branch. But it was security stuff, security service interest, really.
Did you ever call into question the infiltration of the WRP by your officers in circumstances where they were not acting criminally and were not a threat to public order?
No, I didn't. And really that thought's only come to me in recent times. Why were we there? And perhaps it was an area where perhaps we were being too kind, or the branch was being too kind to the security service.
Now, I'm going to move to the 1975 report. And there's a paragraph there, we can turn it up if necessary, but the gist is that on many occasions, organisers' estimates of attendance at demonstrations were widely inaccurate, or they weren't communicated at all to the police. Can you help us with how the SDS would know that an organiser's estimate was widely inaccurate?
Well, largely because the SDS officers, the field officers, were in the organisations who were going to be involved with this, and therefore had a very clear idea of who was likely to take part and where and how.
What I'm driving at is that very often your officers were embedded in a branch, and sometimes were a little bit higher up, but very often they were infiltrating at branch level and could provide intelligence about what attendance from that branch would be. But the overall estimate for a large demonstration presumably came from elsewhere.
Yes, but I think largely we're talking about the SWP. There was communication between the branches. People knew what was going to happen, I think.
Did you get feedback from A8? There
were occasions, yes, when there was feedback from A8. Largely it was with grateful thanks, I think is the word that is best put, the term I could best use. There was one occasion, apart from on paper, there was one occasion certainly when the head of uniform operations came out to see the field officers in one of the safe flats to say thanks for what was being done to make his life much easier.
I'm going to move now to the 1976 report. This is the document at tab 11, sir. It's MPS, if we can have it up, dash 0728 980. This is a report that was signed by you, so presumably you either wrote it or it was written and approved
Yes.
for you and approved by you. I'm interested on page 1 at paragraph 1, where there is some coverage of or explanation for infiltration of anti-racist groups. So I'm picking it up from about 2/3 of the way down paragraph 1, where it reads, however, the potential for violence amongst revolutionary ultra-left groupings remains as strong as ever, but it is beginning to reveal itself more in comparatively small local actions against, in particular, the ultra-right National Front and National Party, where those involved hope to catch the police off their guard. To combat this, the SDS has found it necessary to keep a close watch both on the extremist organisations and on local broad front anti-racialist groups through which the revolutionaries operate. Were there any other reasons why the SDS kept an eye on anti-racialist groups?
No.
The same report, if we can go to page 4, paragraph 9. Thank you. Refers to the far right. It reads, for some months in 1975, an officer from the squad penetrated the National Front at the behest of his parent Trotskyist organisation. The information gained added nothing of real value to that obtainable from already excellent special branch sources, and since the officer's withdrawal early in 1976, it has not been considered necessary to replace him. If the Metropolitan Police is to keep the peace between the extremes of the political spectrum, it is clearly essential that accurate information be readily available from both ends. Should existing sources on the far right show any sign of weakening, the SDS will give immediate consideration to renewed coverage there. Would it be fair to say you were offering the services of the SDS to infiltrate the far right if the powers that be thought it necessary?
Yes.
And would it be right that an SDS officer in a far right group would have the advantage of, over perhaps alternative sources, of being very immediate and somebody with whom you could have conversations twice a week and therefore be very interactive?
Yes.
There is a suggestion in this paragraph that there were already sources within the far right. I don't want you to go into any detail about what those sources were, but other than that, were there any reasons that you were aware of why the SDS was not tasked to infiltrate the far right?
No, we were a support service supporting C Squad in this, and if they needed it, this is why I wrote it in that way, if they needed it, we would organise it.
Could we go up one paragraph to para 8, please? This paragraph differentiates between different types of anti-fascist and anti-racist group. It says, in the area of anti-fascist, anti-racist committees, there is a distinct dividing line between those controlled by members of the Labour Party and even the Communist Party of Great Britain, and those controlled by elements of Trotskyists, Maoists, and anarchists. The former cooperate with police in their street activities and steward demonstrations closely, and are therefore of no concern to the Special Demonstration Squad. The second group, however, tend to be used by revolutionaries as a cloak for the organisation of violent confrontations with the ultra-right and the police, whom they bracket together as fascists and enemies of the working class. Is this how anti-racist and anti-fascist groups were perceived by the SDS?
Yes.
And by Special Branch?
Yes, I believe so. I wrote that, and that's how I perceived it.
How do you tell the difference between or define when an ultra-left group has seized control of an anti-racist group?
Just by the rhetoric going on within the meetings.
Would the personalities who were attending the meetings make any difference?
Of course.
I'd just like to explore whether this distinction was actually observed in practice. We've heard, for example, that the anti-apartheid movement was the subject of reporting almost entirely before your time, although we found a report during your time. But it was not controlled by the ultra-left, was it?
No, it was not.
So why report on the anti-apartheid movement?
Because at one time, as I understand it, they were involved in disorder and even criminal damage.
Was it really a big threat? Weren't its marches actually very well stewarded?
Oh, the marches certainly. I'm thinking more about the activities against South African tours and so on.
Well, I was going to come to that. The Stop the 70 tour, again,
Before
your time, of course. But that was essentially controlled by a young liberal.
Yes.
And so not the ultra-left.
No.
But that was very thoroughly infiltrated by the SDS. So why was that?
Well, simply because, yes, the police needed to know what the next move was going to be.
Was that for public order purposes?
Yes.
I think in your era, the Stop All Racialist tours, although in the result I don't think it came to very much, did it?
I don't think it did. I can't recall too much about that.
What was the reason for seeking intelligence about Stop All Racialist tours?
I would think a hangover from the previous activity against the South Africans, therefore the concern that maybe that would be used by those who wanted to cause disorder.
Prior reputation.
Absolutely. Better put.
Could we go to page 3, please, of this file, and to paragraph 3? I'm going to ask you some questions now about specific groups. Paragraph 3 is about Tom. Under present conditions, the risk to the lives of the officers concerned would be too great to justify an attempt at direct coverage of the official and provisional wings of the Irish Republican movement. Nevertheless, much useful information has been obtained through involvement with the Troops Out movement, the so-called Trade Union Committee Against the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and Peace Through Freedom Committee, which was formed to coordinate opposition to the Peace People from Belfast. The Republican organisations, nervous of police activity under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, have shown little appetite for demonstrating their beliefs. Now, what I'm interested in is where it says much useful information has been obtained. Now, Tom wasn't seeking to overthrow the state, was it? And Tom wasn't much of a public order threat, was it?
Could be. I'm not sure it was. It was large at times. It was an umbrella organisation. And was infiltrated or manipulated, I think is probably the right word, by the far left. I think our concern always was that maybe it would turn into a problem. And of course, there were erstwhile known people from the Irish Republican movement quietly involved there. That was useful to have as well.
I see. So the useful information was on harder core Republicans and just in case they became a
Very
public
much so.
order problem.
Yes.
Was that just in case approach a theme that runs through SDS infiltration?
I think we tried to be ahead of the game, certainly.
In terms of the anarchist groups, we've heard some evidence that some anarchists could sometimes be violent. Is that fair?
Yes.
Was there any other reason for infiltrating anarchist groups?
No, just certainly in the broader sense, violence, extreme violence, as we'd seen in the past.
Bombings.
Sorry?
Bombings.
Yes. But also, they were often people who would, as a small group in the middle of a demonstration, decide that they were going to have a go at the police or maybe another group, maybe the fascists, I don't know. It was very much a case they were inclined to get involved in disorder.
We heard evidence on Monday from a witness called Roy Creamer, who was a sergeant at the Material Time and an expert in the branch about anarchists. He explained to us that not all anarchists were problematic, and he painted a benign picture of the Friends of Freedom Press, or a relatively benign picture of the Friends of Freedom Press. Did you make any attempts to separate and distinguish between anarchist groups?
I would bow to Roy Creamer's expert knowledge, academic knowledge on the anarchist side. I think he was the only one in Special Branch who could describe the difference between one group of anarchists and situationists in Germany. Quite beyond me, I'm afraid.
Can I take that as a no?
You can, yes.
Could we go in this same file to page 4, please, and paragraph 7? This is Big Flame. Now, the background to this was a year in which Richard Clarke had been compromised, and he was trying to enter Big Flame, wasn't he, at the time when he was compromised?
Yes.
It reads, a sinister Big Flame organisation which originated in the northwest but soon spread to London was the subject of close scrutiny until September, when, for security reasons, it was decided to withdraw. The organisation comprises a number of hitherto unaligned revolutionaries from the shop floor of industry, combined with a clique of well-educated individuals, several with angry brigade associations. Whilst there has been no known illegality in its London activities, it has been responsible for violence in Liverpool, and there is little doubt that a large number of its members would be inclined to follow that path given the right circumstances. Whereas the ultra-left as a whole claims to be security conscious, no organisation has shown practical ingenuity in the field of investigation to compare with that of Big Flame. There is little doubt that this organisation has more to hide and hence more to fear from the police than some of the others. Now, would it be right to say that the practical ingenuity that you were referring to was finding Richard Clarke's death certificate?
Yes.
And you describe the group as sinister, but at the same time, halfway down that paragraph, it says there is no known illegality. Was this concern about Big Flame essentially built upon suspicion rather than hard fact?
Yes, it was.
And we have heard that it was an organisation which had quite an interest in women's rights. Do you recall that?
No.
And you obviously think that they've got something to hide. Did you ever get to the bottom of what it was?
No.
Did you ever find out whether they were hiding anything?
No. I'm hesitant talking about that paragraph.
Okay, I won't take it any further. I will ask that we, on the same page, we go down to paragraph 10. This is a paragraph about product. It says the quality and quantity of materials submitted by the SDS officers has been maintained at a consistently high level throughout the year under review, whilst the value of up-to-the-minute information about forthcoming public order matters is easily understood. Less obvious is a considerable saving in police time produced by a constant flow of reports about people and organisations involved in extreme political activity. These reports form an essential part of the base of information which enables Special Branch to provide accurate assessments of the strength and threat of demonstrations and to bring, if we could go over the page please, into the realms of reason the claims about numbers of participants made by organisers. I will stop there. I've drawn that to your attention, Mr. Craft, because reading it suggests that Special Branch found reporting on individuals of value. And when we discussed this issue this morning, you told us that reporting on individuals was essentially for the benefit of the security service.
That is correct. But of course, the branch was working for the security service in the area of subversion, the organisations and the people. And what was happening, and had been happening throughout my service, and well before that, I believe, that the security service would ask the Special Branch, please can you identify A, B and C, because they consider them subversive, and somebody would then have to go out on inquiries to discover who these people were. Now, if we were feeding information in advance, then it saved an awful lot of time.
Perhaps if we could go back up the page so we've got the first bit of that paragraph to hand. Thank you. I mean, this does seem to be going beyond that. It's talking about it being a useful base of information enabling Special Branch to provide accurate assessments. We've heard evidence that those who compile the threat assessments took into account not what might be called just immediate intelligence, but also background intelligence about groups and individuals. Are you able to help us with whether or not reporting on individuals was used for that purpose?
No, I can't help with that.
And finally, if we go to page 12 of this file, now this is an unsigned copy of a letter from Assistant Commissioner Crime Wilson to R. Armstrong, Deputy Under Secretary of State at the Home Office. And at page 13 of the file, third paragraph down, it says, I would therefore seek authority for the continuation of these activities. That's a continuation of the SDS. The degree of coverage considered necessary is under constant review, and all the squad's systems and areas of coverage have recently been examined in detail by a working party comprising 3 chief superintendents in Special Branch in order to ensure the minimising of risk and of unnecessary activity by the squad. I am pleased to say that the number of officers who are purely operational in this field has gradually been reduced from the original 26 in 1968 to a current strength of 12. this has to a degree been achieved by more effective use of operational personnel, and under present conditions is the minimum by which adequate intelligence can be obtained over the wide extremist spectrum. Now, we'll come in a moment to the working party that's referred to, because we understand that you sat on that. But my question at this stage is, as far as you are aware, was that working party the only formal review of what the SDS was doing during your tenure?
It is the only formal review I can remember.
And so, where the letter says the degree of coverage considered necessary is under constant review, is that painting a picture of rather more review than was actually going on?
I think painting a slightly strong picture, in the sense that we kept an eye on it, in the sense there was no point in covering something which wasn't of value. Equally, was there something we should be looking at which we weren't?
Now, if you will just keep in mind the statistics about the number of officers, I'm going to come back to those later, but if you take note of those. Before we go on to the working party, there are two more documents I'd like to show you from the years 1976 and 1977. If we could take this one down, please, and if we could have up next the document at tab 16, which is MPS-0730-729. This is a letter of thanks from the Lancashire Police, dated the 20th of September 1976, in relation to the Action Against Racism demonstration in Blackburn, which had taken place on the 11th of September 1976. Was that really thanks not to Mackintosh and Walker, but to the underlying undercover officers' coverage of events?
I would believe so.
And if we take that down and have up, please, a document which is at tab 18, MPS-0730-700. Thank you. This is a letter of thanks addressed to you from the Security Service dated the 23rd of June 1977, which says, I've been asked by our desk involved with the Socialist Workers' Party to convey their gratitude for the flow of information you are sending us on the activities of the SWP. This is very much appreciated. It's right to say the Security Service were very interested in the SWP, weren't they?
Yes, just a little.
How frequently did you get feedback about the SDS?
Rarely.
And how much of it was positive and how much of it was negative?
I don't recall anything negative.
If we could take that down, please, and if we could have up in its place MPS-0730-745, tab 9 of your bundle, sir. This is what I'm going to call the Watts Working Party. And this is a working party set up to review essentially the utility of the SDS, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you are in high-ranking company, aren't you?
Yes, I was obviously the new boy.
Chief Superintendent R. Wilson, HN332, together with Chief Inspector Neil and yourself, all being chaired by Chief Superintendent Watts. The record describes the conclusions of the working party as unanimous. Is that correct?
Yes. Although I should say I don't actually remember any discussions, but I'm sure that we would not have disagreed.
Well, I was asking you that because the police now, and certainly in those days, was a very disciplined, hierarchical organisation, wasn't it?
Yes, the branch was never really like that.
I see. So did you feel you'd had your say with it?
Of course.
Now, looking at it bit by bit, paragraph 1 essentially is communicating the fact there'd been a decline in violent disorder. It reads, certainly the degree of violence associated with public demonstrations has declined since the formation of the squad in 1968. And was it that decline that had essentially prompted the review?
Probably.
Do you know?
No.
Paragraph 2 says, with respect to the degree of coverage considered necessary by the SDS, two aspects are of primary importance. Firstly, the degree of involvement and manipulation exercised by the ultra-left in all protest organisations, particularly in ad hoc committees formed to arrange major demonstrations. Secondly, the number of splinter groups continually being formed, invariably consisting of militant elements. The latter do not recognise the need to liaise with police regarding proposed demonstrations and pickets, many of which are organised at short notice, and coverage within or access to these organisations is essential if adequate police arrangements are to be made. So that's plainly making the case, isn't it, for continuing the SDS?
Yes.
Can I ask you, why was it that the police couldn't simply monitor open sources, talk to the protesters, and do without the SDS?
Largely because those involved didn't want to talk to the police, were looking to cause confrontation at times, and the only way we could get the intelligence necessary to police them proportionately was to have people close to the ground.
Now, accepting that there were some advantages of having an undercover officer, the immediacy we've talked about, the flexibility of instructions and so forth, did it really make all that much difference?
I think it made a considerable difference to policing of public order in the Metropolitan Police. That is my view.
And it's based on?
Based upon the fact that those who ran the policing side, the uniform policing side, took that view in my time, and I knew more than one of them.
You're hinting that you got personal feedback, is that fair?
Yes.
Is it a case simply that resources were better allocated because of the SDS, or are you saying that the intelligence provided stopped more serious public disorder occurring?
I think both. I think it did prevent serious disorder very often. No, not very often, quite from time to time, but also was of value in terms of police resources.
Moving down to the unnumbered paragraph directly under 2. Nevertheless, with the reduction in political public disorders, the strength of the SDS has gradually been reduced from the original 26 operational officers to the current 12 officers engaged in the field. It is agreed that this is the minimum coverage necessary to prove effective and might have to be increased if the situation deteriorated. Where did the figure 26 operational officers come from?
Well, that came from the original group set up in 1968 when Conrad Dixon was instructed to pull together a group of people, and they used to go mob-handed to meetings because they hadn't got a clue what was happening. So they went along, if they thought it won more chance if 2 or 3 went into one of these meetings, one of them might get in. So yes, they had more people.
Do you know who your source was? Where did you get that? Where did that number come from?
I thought it came from the open, I may be wrong here, the open source report of Conrad Dixon, and which I've read. I found it on the web, but I wouldn't have known that at that time, but
I'm asking you where the figure came from at that time.
I don't know.
Don't know.
Whether it was on the original SDS file, I don't know.
We haven't been able to find
You
a
haven't
time
found
when
it?
there
Oh,
were
well, I'm sorry. But
when there were 26 SDS officers.
I like that. Yes.
serving
No, I
in
don't
one
know.
go. Is it possible that that this was inaccurate, being 7.5 years after the event?
Always possible, yes. But they did have a lot of people.
Moving to paragraph 3, bearing in mind that the primary task of the SDS is to provide intelligence in the public order field, it is difficult to proportion their value in this field compared with the off-spin information provided for the security service. For example, if an officer covers a meeting called to discuss whether to demonstrate or not, and the latter view prevails, then the only positive result of his attendance is seen in the subsequent report of individuals attending, etc., which is of interest to Box 500. Nevertheless, his reasons for attending are of equal importance from a public order point of view. Do you mean the value of negative reporting?
Yes.
There? Now, first of all, the security service is the benefit to them is described as off-spin. To what extent is this formally observing at the ultimate defence line that we looked at earlier and keeping to a mantra that the primary task is public order, or to what extent is it actually a correct reflection of what was happening on the ground?
The primary object was public order, but clearly it was of great benefit to the security service and the branch in terms of saving time in following up on security service inquiries. So although its purpose was public order, and there would been, if public order had not been, or public order intelligence had not been essential, then I can't say the SDS should continue.
The next paragraph at the bottom, at the very bottom of the page, makes clear that the committee thought that a very considerable benefit had been conferred on the security service by the SDS, and it had been fully acknowledged. Does that fairly reflect the position?
I believe so.
And then over the page, it says, at the conclusion of the working party's deliberations, I spoke with DAC Gibson and Commander Fleming of A Department. Does I mean Rollo Watts?
Yes, it's signed off by Rollo Watts, so yes.
Or put another way, do you recall speaking to DAC Gibson and Commander Fleming?
No, I did not. That was Rollo Watts.
I was assured that the information and assessments prepared by Special Branch regarding impending demonstrations is considered to be of extreme importance to the Uniform Branch, not only to assist in providing adequate police coverage, but also to avoid overreaction, which could in itself lead to a provocative situation. In this respect, the Chief Superintendents of all operational squads in the branch speak most highly of the assistance rendered by the SDS. Now, first of all, is it right that all operational squads benefited from the SDS? Because we've heard talk primarily of C Squad with a little bit of B Squad.
I'm sorry, primarily C Squad. I can imagine, no, I think, I'm trying to think, really for B Squad it was very little. E Squad, which of course is dealing with international, I'm thinking now of anything involved. Grunwick, obviously a clear example where the vast majority of those who were protesting about their wages and so on, of course, were Asian, and therefore that would have been E Squad, I think, to some extent. But no, C Squad, I think, was the one that mattered.
And the adjective extreme importance to Uniform Branch, might there be a little hyperbole?
A little, I think.
It's a feature of the documents we've been looking at that very senior officers speak in superlatives about the SDS when seeking funding from the Home Office. Did you get the impression that there was considerable enthusiasm at the senior levels of the Metropolitan Police for the SDS to continue?
Yes, I did.
And why was that?
I think mainly for public order. I think police in the 1970s and 80s had to learn a lot of lessons in terms of public order, and accurate, timely intelligence was vital in terms of the proportionate policing and keeping the peace.
And in terms of relationship with the security service and the Home Office, was it regarded as a good thing?
I believe so.
Can we move now to visit by the Commissioner? In your witness statement, you refer to recalling a visit by Sir David McNee.
Yes.
Was this whilst you were at the DCI of the SDS, or was that when you were Chief Superintendent?
While I was the DCI.
And what can you remember about it?
I can remember he was keen to come and see the field officers, that we had a very pleasant, sociable time. I think we had lunch. He was a very practical policeman, and it was a useful day, good for morale.
Now, you will have seen in the bundle some documents which were prepared for a subsequent Commissioner, Kenneth Newman, in 1983, I think it is. Was a pack similar to that prepared for Sir David McNee?
I don't think it was. I think it was less formal than that. I think he said he was coming. I went with him and I briefed him on what it was all about. And no, I don't think we were quite so formal.
So is it fair to say then Sir David McNee would have known which areas were being infiltrated and have met the officers concerned?
He would have met them, yes.
And can you recall how long he stayed?
No, I can't. I would have thought 2 or 3 hours, but I'm guessing.
And did he have time for conversation with individual undercover police officers?
I think he would have had time. I can't remember whether he did have individual conversations. We didn't hold a meeting. He was chatting to everybody.
And what feedback did you receive from him?
Nothing formal. I think he said he enjoyed the visit, but that was informal to me.
Did he express any concerns to you about the SDS?
No.
Any anxieties, for example, the operational security?
No, none at all.
Can I move now from the SDS to, first of all, 1979 and the demonstration at Southall at which Blair Peach received fatal injuries. One of our anonymous officers has given evidence that he was instructed to attend Blair Peach's funeral in 1979. He thought that it might have been you who so instructed him. Was it?
I don't recall instructing anybody to go.
Is it possible?
Oh, it's possible, but I don't recall it.
And what was the police interest in Blair Peach's funeral?
I don't know, is the answer. That's why I'm doubtful about whether it was my instruction. I don't know.
Was there general concern that Blair Peach's death, the inquest, and the justice campaign were bad news for the Metropolitan Police?
Well, certainly it was bad news for the Metropolitan Police, because the inquest came up with the fact that he was probably killed by a police officer.
And did the Metropolitan Police want to be ahead of the game in knowing what the justice campaign was going to do?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are you aware of the SDS taking a special interest in Blair Peach and the justice campaign or not?
Only to the extent that it would have been wise to be involved in case it was going to go beyond the campaign into some sort of disorder.
Now we're trying to trace the dates at which you were Chief Superintendent of Esquad. We think that you may have started as an acting Chief Superintendent from about February 1981. Does that sound right?
I don't think I ever went there as acting Chief Superintendent. I think the post became vacant when I was promoted Chief Superintendent, and that was why I went there.
Your substantive promotion, we believe, was May or June 1981. Does that sound about right?
That's about right, yes.
And we think that you stayed in that role until about April or May 1984.
If it was as late as 84, might have been end of 83. I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't fix it.
And Esquad was a wide remit, wasn't it?
It
All
was.
operational support to Special Branch.
Yes.
And your role vis-à-vis the SDS was oversight, wasn't
Yes.
it? Can you help us with how you oversaw the SDS?
Yes. Daily telephone contact with Chief Inspector or Inspector SDS, either by myself or the Superintendent. Visits occasionally out to see the field officers. And at that time their office was down the road. But quite often the Chief Inspector or the Inspector would be over and would come into my office to chat, to sort out any problems there might have been. So it was fairly close.
What sort of things did you discuss?
What they were doing, how, were there any welfare problems, any problems the Chief Inspector was having, just generally how the unit was operating.
And would that have included when a new officer came along?
Probably. I can't think of any specific occasion.
And in consultation with the other chief superintendents, would you put in your opinion as to where it might be useful for an officer to be deployed?
Probably not, although it might have cropped up. More likely, that would be a conversation between the Chief Inspector SDS and Chief Superintendent C Squad.
We know that in around this era, the SDS starts infiltrating some new targets, one of which is CND. Are you able to help us as to why the SDS might have become interested in CND?
My recollection is that the only time we were really interested in CND was the Greenham Common women. Clearly, we couldn't get male officers into that, and we had recruited a lady who would go and join the Greenham Common women. So that's why we were, if you like, CND involved.
You certainly did that, but you also had an officer who we know as HN65 who infiltrated CND itself. Can you recall what the concern was about CND?
No, I can't.
Can
I'm sorry.
Can you recall whether there was any pressure from any quarter outside the police to take an interest in CND?
No, I can't.
Was there anything coming from the Home Office or from government?
Not that I know of.
The other field was animal rights
Yes.
activism, which grew. What was the concern there?
Oh, the concern there was firebombs, attacks on research centres. In other words, quite akin to terrorism, full stop. And that's why we were interested. It started off in a small way. I think, in fact, the whole thing started with one policeman in Essex who was keeping an index, and I think the branch eventually took it on because it became national. And the whole, once we started to look at it, we realised that it was quite a dangerous thing to developing.
Now, we've got a document in the bundle which shows that you, in the role of Chief Superintendent Esquad, were invited with many others to a party by the security service. You know the documents I mean, don't you?
I know the document. I have absolutely no recollection of that meeting.
Why were you invited to that party? Was it because the SDS fell within your remit?
I would imagine so.
And were the security service keen to maintain that relationship by schmoozing you?
I presume so.
Can you recall anything of what happened?
No, I can't. I have no recollection at all. I've seen the piece of paper, and none at all.
Passage of time or the intensity of the festivities?
Neither. Nothing at all.
Righto. I shall move on. In your role, did you have any function liaising with bodies outside the police other than the security service? For example, the Home Office?
No.
Or Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary?
No.
Annual reports. We won't go through the annual reports from this era in the detail that we looked at those from the 1970s. But at this stage, the annual reports are crossing your desk on their way up
Yes.
the chain of command, aren't they?
Yes.
You endorse each one of them in glowing terms, don't you?
Yes.
Vital component, firmly behind the SDS. You talk about the contribution to the public order sphere, about animal rights targeting being well advanced, about them having an excellent year, and so forth. What was the purpose of endorsing them in such glowing terms?
Because it was true.
And did you understand that these reports were on their way to the Home Office to secure continuing funding?
Certainly.
And so would it be right to say you were fully convinced of the ongoing utility of the SDS in this
Yes, I
era?
was.
Was your conviction in the utility of the SDS increasing, decreasing, or the same as it was when you had been in charge?
I would say the same.
Now, can I move to the second Commissioner's visit, that of Sir Kenneth Newman in 1983. Were you involved in preparations for that visit?
I'm not sure. I've seen the piece of paper where this is referred to. I think I met him at the SDS office, which was not in Scotland Yard, but I think I didn't go with him. I think I left that to David Short, who was the Chief Inspector.
Did you see the briefing paper?
No.
And you said that you explained the workings of S-Squad to the Commissioner. Presumably you wouldn't have lost the opportunity to plug the SDS to him.
Of course.
And what was Sir Kenneth Newman's attitude to the SDS?
I don't recall his attitude. I think he was just interested.
Did he know anything of the arrests of officers?
I doubt it.
Of the use of deceased children's identities?
I don't think so.
Of sexual activity between undercover police officers and members of the public?
No, I wouldn't think so.
And of the conviction of some officers in their undercover identities?
I don't think that was mentioned.
Was it fair to say that the impression that was being given was an entirely positive one?
Of course.
So would this be a good time to break?
Certainly it would. So that we all have some idea of how much there is to go, are you able to give an estimate of your questions?
Yes, I'm doing quite well. I'm nearly finished.
Yes, good.
I should imagine I'm certainly less than half an hour.
Yes. Day is not actually anywhere near ended yet because we have to have a pause while, after Mr. Barr has finished his own questions, we have to have a pause while others may raise topics with him that they wish him to raise with you. And my guess, if you want it, is that we will all still be here at 5, but not much beyond.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Mr. Fernandez, Neil, could you ask Mr. Barr to come and have a word with me, please?
All rise, please.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Craft, I'm just going to interject a question that goes back to your time as head of the SDS. We know that the SDS infiltrated the Workers' Revolutionary Party.
Yes.
Two officers were involved in doing that. It was on your watch that the infiltration of the Workers' Revolutionary Party came to an end. No further officer was deployed into that group. Can you recall why it was that it was decided that it was no longer necessary to do that?
I can't recall that specifically, but I assume it was on the basis that we couldn't justify covering it because it wasn't a public order problem.
Now, I'm conscious we don't have the cipher key to cover this officer, and if there comes a point in time when it's not fair to you because you don't know who, if you don't know who it is we're talking about, say so, and we'll deal with this line of questioning after the break. But can we call up, please, the document at tab 37, which is MPS-0526-785. And if we see there at page 2 that this is January 1984, you're signing it off as Chief Superintendent. You're sending this to Commander Ops. This arrest of an SDS field officer will have done no harm to his standing amongst his comrades. And then if we go to page 3 to see what that was about, it says, on Friday the 13th of January 1984, Detective Constable HN12, a special demonstration squad officer working under the assumed name of Michael Hartley within the Revolutionary Communist Group, was arrested by police from Highbury Vale Police Station for illegal bill posting. The circumstances were that DC HN12 and Privacy, unemployed of Privacy, an RCG comrade, had been directed by committee members of the RCG front organisation Irish Solidarity Movement to affix posters on appropriate premises in Holloway Road, a normal activity for a group of this nature, advertising a forthcoming week of action concerning informers in Ireland. At 8:30 p.m. that evening, PC5A and PC5B on patrol in a marked police vehicle apprehended both individuals in the act of pasting posters to a hoarding in Holloway Road. DCHN12 and Privacy were arrested, taken to Highbury Vale Police Station and charged with, quote, that you did on Friday the 13th of January 1984 affix a posting bill at Holloway Road N19 without the consent of the owner, contrary to section 54, subsection 10, Metropolitan Police Act 1839. Now, what I would like to know, first of all, is that sufficient to remind you of the incident so that we can continue? Or would you like to wait until we can tell you who the officer was?
I don't need to know who the officer was. I just don't remember the case at all.
Was there any, it may not be worth me asking you any questions, but what I'd like to ask you, was there any consideration of the fairness of the prosecution of HN12's co-accused? Can you help us with that at all?
No, I can't. I don't remember the case. I'm sorry.
Can I move now to some of the officers who were serving at the time? And I am going to have to, I think, put HN12 back until we can tell you who he is. Do you know who I mean by HN67?
No, he's not on my pack, I'm afraid.
HN11 is a man who we can tell you was Mike Chitty. Can you remember Mike Chitty?
Vaguely, yes.
What can you tell us of Mr. Chitty's character?
Nothing. The only connection I have, I think, is the organisation he was covering. I think that's about all I can remember.
Can you recall HN 106?
Just. Again, knowing very little, I'm afraid.
We understand that there was a concern that he was becoming known as a certain woman's boyfriend. Was that ever discussed with you?
No.
And we also understand that there was some management concern within the SDS that he might have been sleeping with another woman. Was that ever raised with you?
No, it was not.
HN 126.
Yes, I remember him.
Did you...
As a person, not so much on the squad.
Did you ever hear anything to the effect that he had become close to a female activist,
No.
or that something sexual might be going on?
No.
Can you help us with HN 155?
Yes.
What can you tell us about his character in relation to women?
Nothing in relation to women at all.
I think that's all I'm interested in at this stage. Can I move to assumption of positions of responsibility whilst you were Chief Superintendent? There were some officers in the SDS who got into significant positions with the Socialist Workers' Party. In particular, HN 155 got into the headquarters of the Socialist Workers' Party.
Yes.
Did you know that?
I don't recall that now.
He was able, from that position, to provide membership lists and so forth. Lots of information about the inner workings of the SWP. Does that jog your memory?
It doesn't, actually. My recollection is that he was not the prime source at senior level with SWP.
Are you able to comment upon what you would have thought if you had known that there was a member of the SDS within the SWP's headquarters, either taking or copying its documents?
I would have thought it was a great value to the security service.
Would you have considered it proper or improper?
Proper.
Would you have considered at all the propriety of taking confidential information as a police officer by deception?
No.
Was the officer you were thinking about HN 80, who also became quite prominent within the SWP? How aware were you of his prominence?
In detail at the time, I wasn't. I've learned more since, but I gather he was pretty prominent. I think he was a main source of intelligence.
And was the institutional view at the time that that was a jolly good thing?
Yes.
With hindsight, do you still adhere to that view?
I think it's tricky in terms of how much influence he had. I don't think they were involved in anything illegal, but I think somebody that close in could have found himself in a difficult situation.
I want to ask you now a little bit about vetting. We touched upon this earlier, but if we could have up, please, MPS-0727-595 at page 27. Now, this should be the 1979 Special Branch Annual Report, and it contains some statistics about vetting. And it talks about inquiries on individuals and organisations. Thank you very much. Could we have the top of the page first, please? Some general statistics about inquiries on individuals and reports in the thousands. And then vetting inquiries for box 500, 2,846. Can you help us with what vetting inquiries for box 500 would be?
Not from the SDS point of view. I have a vague recollection of being given a vetting inquiry when I was probably a detective constable or maybe a sergeant on C Squad, trying to discover about an individual, what was on the background of an individual. I can't tell you more than that. I don't really know what it was. I just remember there were things like vetting inquiries.
Would it be right to say that when vetting inquiries came in, one of the places an officer might look would be registry files?
Oh, yes.
And therefore it would follow, would it, that some of the information which might be used would include that had been gathered by the SDS?
Yes.
Thank you. We will find you the names of the officers I want to ask you about during the 20-minute break so that those can be put to you. But other than that, that's it from me for the moment.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yeah. We will now have a 20-minute break so that any topics that anyone wishes Mr. Barr to raise can be put to him and he can decide whether or not to raise them with you.
Thank you, sir.
And then at the end, if there is any re-examination, that will bring your evidence to a conclusion.
Good.
And I may have been unduly pessimistic. We'll see.
All rise, please.
Mr. Bond.
Thank you, sir. There are a number of further matters to ask Mr. Craft about. Mr. Craft, can we start first of all with the document which is at UCPI 5027515. Now, this is a note made by the Security Service of a visit that they made to the SDS in July 1982. And it appears that HN 68 was the detective inspector speaking on behalf of the SDS at the time, but it obviously falls within the time when you were the chief superintendent. It's paragraph 5 that I'm interested in. It says, despite his misdemeanors, Cooper has not been withdrawn as an SDS source. Now, Cooper is the cover name for HN 155. He claimed that he was acting on the advice of his solicitors in not making maintenance payments. HN 68 is still very worried by the case because Cooper's position in the right to work movement gives him regular access to Ernie Roberts MP and meetings at the House of Commons. First of all, Mr. Craft, were you aware that one of the SDS's officers had regular access to a Member of Parliament and meetings at the House of Commons?
No, I did not.
It appears that one reading of this document is there was considerable concern that if, as a result of HN 155's marital difficulties, anything was to come out about the fact that Mr. Roberts's meetings had been infiltrated by an undercover officer would be embarrassing. Do you recall any concerns arising from HN 155's divorce proceedings?
No, I don't.
Would it have been a concern to you if you had known that an SDS undercover officer had regular access to an MP and meetings at the House of Commons?
Yes, I think I would have been concerned.
And what would your concern have been?
Becoming too close with politics. And that is legitimate politics.
Can I ask you now about something completely different? You have given us evidence about the character of HN 300 and HN 297 Richard Clarke, or said you didn't know much about them, in circumstances where a number of other witnesses have described them in terms which might cast doubt upon how safe they were to be left as undercover officers with members of the opposite sex. Can you help us with any explanation for that difference in take about their characters?
Yes, I can. I suspect that the behaviour they are reported to have been up to was such that they did not want senior officers to become aware because of the effect it would have had upon their career. And that's why I'm sure that neither my deputy nor I would have known about it. The other factor, I would say, that as far as Richard Clarke is concerned, that I'm becoming aware as this inquiry proceeds that what I knew of Mr. Clarke is rather different from the fact. And I think perhaps that I should have been aware. On the other hand, people who are good at putting up a front can sometimes confuse one. And I'll leave it at that, I think. I'm not happy about Mr. Clark at all.
Now, you accepted in evidence that there was with the benefit of hindsight, a risk that officers might engage in sexual activity with members of the public under cover. Why was that a risk that you only appreciated with hindsight?
I have to say, I think I was being naive at the time. We know a lot more now, we learn as we go along, and that is a factor which would have to be considered in the future.
Can you raise, perhaps rhetorically at one stage, how does one prevent it, meaning that sort of activity? What are your thoughts on how does one prevent it?
I don't know. All I can say is that perhaps it needs to be emphasised regularly before it starts, and also regularly while the operation is continuing, because I don't think there is any way of preventing it, because these things happen, but it is a problem.
Did you ever take the view that these things happen whilst you were leading the SDS?
No, I did not.
Can I ask you now a specific question about HN 354 Vince Harvey? His evidence was that he came to you to raise a problem that a female member of the group he was infiltrating, the SWP, was taking an amorous interest in him. Can you recall that?
No, I'm sorry, I can't.
Did that happen?
Well, I don't recall it at all.
If it had happened, do you think you would have recalled it?
Oh, yes, I think so.
A term which we've heard activists referred to as by the SDS is wheeries. Were you familiar with that term?
No, not at all.
Have you heard about it since?
No,
Have you heard it used elsewhere?
I don't even know what it means.
It's used to mean an activist.
No.
When you were the chief superintendent of S Squad, did you come across Bob Lambert?
No.
Did you meet Bob Lambert at reunions?
I don't think so. I wouldn't recognise the man.
What was your reaction when it emerged that Bob Lambert had fathered a child whilst undercover?
Shock, I think, is the best way to put it.
Anything more?
No. One wondered how he had the time to be involved to that extent with somebody. Unless, of course, it was a one-off, but
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Well, exactly. And I wonder what supervision was involved. Was there more freedom? Was it more national than London? I don't know. Certainly, yes, shock is the answer.
The officer we know as HN 298
Yes.
gave evidence of an incident which culminated with him punching Jerry Lawless. Were you aware of that happening at the time?
No, I wasn't.
Do you know about it now?
No, I just smiled because I had dealings with Jerry Lawless in other circumstances.
If you had known about it at the time, what would you have done about the fact one of your officers had assaulted Jerry Lawless?
Well, I think that is something that we'd have had a look at and decide should that man be left out in the field, because clearly he's not under control in those circumstances.
And in terms of taking any formal action, would the same qualifications that you raised earlier in your evidence about the difficulties of going through formal police disciplinary proceedings
Oh, yes.
apply?
Yes.
Can I now ask for another document to be put up? MPS-0728785. And we're back to Rick Gibson. If we could go to page 3, please. This is a report dated the 25th of March 1976, and it's the bottom of the third paragraph that I'm interested in. But before we look at that, I think we better go to your signature, which is at the end at page 4, sorry. So you've signed this report.
As a Chief Inspector, yes?
Yeah. If we go back to page 3, paragraph 3, I think really the point is at the end of that paragraph. Gibson was chosen to fill the post of convener and privacy to take over from Gibson as the Tom London organiser. So it seems from this document that you did know at the material time that Richard Clarke had taken the post of convener. Would it follow from that that at the time you were not concerned about him taking that post?
Yes, that's interesting, because I don't remember it, of course. But it was concerning. Why I did nothing about it, I don't know. Perhaps it was too late to do anything about it, but certainly it was concerning.
Gibson is an officer who essentially helps to form a branch of Tom, rises all the way through the ranks of the organisation and takes a role in some of the factional infighting. Why wasn't that stopped?
I really don't know. I wish I had a better answer, but I just don't know.
Can we take that down, please? Can we have up MPS-0740413? Thank you. This is the witness statement of the officer we know as HN353.
Yes.
If we could go to page 25, please. Paragraph 66. He says, I joined the student union when I was a student at Thames Polytechnic in my cover identity and became involved in the union's affairs, becoming the vice president. This fitted with my role as a good revolutionary in the IMG and was a necessary part of my cover identity. I was a delegate at national conferences on a couple of occasions. HN353 was an officer who you managed, wasn't he?
Yes.
Did you have any concerns about one of your officers using a position within a national trade union as part of his cover?
No.
Even though, as vice president, plainly would have some influence in the running of the branch?
Yes, it was interesting, but I didn't have any fears about it. He was a particularly able officer, and he would not have got involved in anything which was illegal.
But wouldn't it have been more proper and very easy to tell him not to assume any role and just to use his membership?
I think it had happened, so I think we were stuck with it.
If we could take that down, please. HN12, if you use the sticky tab, that will take you to the page which will tell you who HN12 is.
Yes, thank you.
Can you help us with HN12's character, in particular as so far as members of the opposite sex are concerned?
No, he was a very quiet officer. Nothing further than that, I think.
Did anything come to your attention about his sexual behaviour whilst he was undercover?
No.
HN67.
Yes, I remember him.
What can you tell us about his character?
Nothing, really. I didn't know him well.
Did anything come to your attention about his sexual behaviour undercover?
No.
In particular, did you hear a rumour that he had fathered a child?
No.
You will be delighted to learn, I am sure, that was the last of my questions.
Thank you.
Any re-examination?
Thanks. So just one
Yes.
topic. You were asked at the very outset about police powers of entry, search and seizure. So that's powers of a constable to enter premises, to search them or to arrest someone. Powers of a constable to search an individual or search premises and seize items. Were the SDS undercover officers doing any of those things?
I don't think so.
Thank you. That's all, sir.
Yes, I think they did, however, at least copy and perhaps take membership lists and such like.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
One question from me, please, and it's a mystery which you may or may not be able to help me on. Both you and Angus McIntosh, who we're going to hear from tomorrow, recall being in the SDS when Richard Clark, HN297, was there. And yet neither of you recall being in the SDS together.
I am totally confused about that, sir. I've given a lot of thought to who my number 2 was on the SDS when I was the Chief Inspector. And I remember Leslie Winningale. I don't remember ever having Angus McIntosh as my number 2. Now, obviously he was, because he was one of those who went to Blackburn, I think, with Richard, I've forgotten the sergeant.
Yes.
Dick Walker. And I knew about that. But it's amazing. And I know Angus McIntosh very well, but I have no recollection of working with him. I always had it in my mind that my number 2 for a while on the SDS was Barry Moss. But that was clearly confusing as well.
Very well. Well, that's a mystery I don't think we will clear up.
I'm afraid not, sir. My aged memory does not go that far.
It's been pretty good so far, and I'm very, very grateful to you for spending the whole of the day answering questions about these events many, many years ago.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll resume again at 10 tomorrow.